One of the most significant figures of the post-World War II era, Mikhail Gorbachev, has died at the age of 91. The former Soviet leader hailed for ending the Cold War without bloodshed, but he failed to prevent the fall of the Soviet Union.
With that port-stained birthmark on his forehead, Mikhail Gorbachev was one of the most recognisable figures in 20th century politics. His attempts to reform the Soviet Union and his role in ending the Cold War made him one of its most influential too. As a young man, Gorbachev studied law at Moscow State University. It's there he met and married fellow student Raisa Titarenko. He went on to forge a career in the Communist Party, eventually aged 54 becoming its general secretary, the leader of the Soviet Union. It was in this role that Gorbachev and his wife broke the mould. He for his outgoing, charismatic nature, Raisa for her stylish outfits and for the unheard-of elegance she brought to the role of Soviet First Lady. But the vast communist nation they ruled was on the brink of crisis. Amid shortages of food and consumer goods, the Soviet command economy was grinding to a halt. There was also alarm at the apparently slow response of the Soviet authorities to the nuclear disaster at Chernobyl. Gorbachev tried to fix things with what he called perestroika and glasnost, reforms that were to revolutionize the Soviet system.
I began these reforms, and my guiding stars were freedom and democracy, without bloodshed, so the people would cease to be a herd led by a shepherd. They would become citizens.
There was revolution too in relations with the West. Face to face with US President Ronald Reagan, Gorbachev made a stunning proposal to eliminate all nuclear missiles held by the two superpowers. It was the beginning of the end of the Cold War. Soon the Berlin Wall would fall. And after a failed coup by hardliners in Moscow, the Soviet Union itself was dissolved and Gorbachev resigned.
I hereby discontinue my activities at the post of President of the USSR.
In 1999, he lost the love of his life, his wife of 46 years, Raisa, who died of leukemia. But there was no love lost between many Russians and Gorbachev. To many of his countrymen, he would always be the man who allowed the great Soviet empire to collapse, exposing millions to hardship and humiliation. Even Gorbachev himself expressed regret. But in the West, he was revered and celebrated as a great statesman, a Nobel Peace Prize winner who played a decisive role in ending the Cold War, peacefully diffusing the most dangerous standoff of the 20th century.
For more now on the life and legacy of Mikhail Gorbachev, let's go live now to Dr. Alexey Muraviev, an associate professor on national security and strategic studies at Curtin University. Professor Muraviev, thank you for your time. Do you agree with that assessment there that we heard in the report that Mikhail Gorbachev revered internationally but loathed at home?
I think it's a pretty accurate assessment. There is no doubt that Gorbachev brought a sense of a relief to the Westerners and the West, the fact that as many back in late 1980s in Europe would be saying that finally they can wake up in the morning, look outside their windows and not worry about seeing Soviet tanks rolling on their streets. So to the West, it was a breath of fresh air. It was a breath of hope that the Soviet Empire, which at that time existed as a pretty close society, the society that controlled the world's largest arsenal of nuclear weapons and had the capability to challenge on the West, was no longer a threat. It was something that could go through reforms that Gorbachev was trying to initiate and entertain the variety of ways, an empire that could actually make steps forward. And perhaps there was actually hope that the Soviet Union, later on Russia as its legal successor, could be embraced as part of the Western civilization. But it was a completely different story inside the Soviet Union, behind the Iron Curtain, when Gorbachev initially was met with love and enthusiasm and hope by his own citizens. And within a few years, all this trust and confidence and credit was effectively lost and gone, and people turned into questioning his decisions, his style of governance. his populism with Western leaders, and later on translated into a complete radical feeling, which ended up being hatred and disrespect.
Did this pave the way for what we're seeing now? Because you look back at 1989 and that period, the democracy protests across the Eastern Bloc, he did not meet that with force. He allowed that to unfold, and then we saw what happened. As you said, welcomed by the West. But the legacy of Mikhail Gorbachev at home is very different in terms of the reality of what we see right now. And the contrast could not be greater, could it, with what we're seeing with the authoritarian Putin?
Look, I mean, we need to remember that Gorbachev was different when he acted abroad and when he acted at home. Yes, he allowed the unification of Germany without making any conditions that the West actually expected of him at the time, trades off. He allowed the disillusionment of the Warsaw Pact. He effectively abandoned the vast network of Soviet allies and dependents across the globe, for which he is still not being forgiven, not only inside the former Soviet space, but in countries like Cuba or even Eastern Germany. But inside the USSR, the situation was different. He authorized the illegal use of the military against peaceful protesters in Georgia, in Azerbaijan, in Lithuania. So a lot of ex-Soviets blame Gorbachev for spilling blood inside his own territory as a desperate attempt to protect the Soviet Empire from Kremlin, from falling into pieces, after he gave people hope that they can speak their mind, they can free their think, they can effectively dream the life that they want to live. So again, he was a man of different ideas, different agendas, and I would actually say different faces too.
One of the great contrasts, I guess, as well, is when you look at the international reaction. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1990. By 1996, when he ran for president again in Russia, it was almost a joke.
Well, he was, and in fact, up until now, including now, the level of confidence that the Russian had in Gorbachev was close to nil. Putin, interestingly enough, never condemned publicly what Gorbachev did. He was very evasive in offering criticism for the period of Gorbachev's time in the office, as well as Yeltsin's time in the office. But he allowed an almost like a verbal onslaught on Gorbachev by pro-Kremlin supporters. He allowed this cult of anti-Gorbachevism to exist and flourish in Russia. And by default, he was presenting himself as someone who is actually fixing the problems and mistakes that created by Gorbachev and his successor, Boris Yeltsin, without necessarily saying, well, it was because of Michael's fault or Mikhail's fault, I have to do X, Y, and Z. So it's a very interesting legacy that Gorbachev leaves behind. But the fact that we're still talking about this political figure over 30 years after he stood down from active duty to the country, and the world speaks of the magnitude of the achievement and the magnitude of the impact that Gorbachev had on all of us.
Professor Alexey Muraviev from Curtin University, thanks for your insights and your time.
Thank you.